The topic of this video is Graphing Transformation Techniques Overview. We are now going to solve the 6 problems referenced in the previous video, and we're going to do that in 2 separate videos, 3 in this one and 3 in the next one. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce something called the order of transformations. So whenever you are using multiple transformations within a single problem, it is recommended that you follow the order of transformations. This will help you when you are entering your graphs in a software platform to make sure that you get the right answer. So as we do each one of these, we're going to identify all of the transformation types by following the order of transformations. Okay, let's go ahead and begin. So the first thing we're going to look for as this becomes this are horizontal shifts. That's adding or subtracting inside close to x. And I see that right here. This subtract 3 is indicative of a horizontal shift right 2. Remember, horizontal shift, horizontal stretch, horizontal compression all feel backwards of what you might think. You might think subtraction is to the left. Nope, it's the reverse of that. It's actually to the right. Okay, the next thing we're looking for is stretching or shrinking. That's multiplication. I don't see any of that. The next thing we're looking for is reflections. That's multiplication by -1. Don't see any of that. And the next thing we're looking for is vertical shifts, which is adding or subtracting outside, which we do have with this subtract 2. That subtract 2 represents a vertical shift down 2. Okay. We'll also discuss how the coordinates change after we do all of the transformations, so we'll actually come back to this problem in a moment. Okay, next one. When this becomes this, what's the transformation? So, do we have any horizontal shifting? Do we have any adding or subtracting inside close to x? No. Do we have any stretching or shrinking? Do we have any multiplication by a positive number? Yes. That right there represents some sort of stretch or shrink. Now, it's inside close to x, which makes it horizontal. And to determine if it's a stretch or shrink, we just have to remember that horizontal is the reverse of what you would expect. You would think 2, which is bigger than 1, would be a stretch. No, it's actually a shrink. This is a horizontal shrink. Okay, and then there are no reflections because there's no negatives, and there's no vertical shifts because there's no adding or subtracting outside far from x. We're done with this one. All right, next one. This becomes that. First thing we look for is horizontal shifts. That's adding or subtracting inside close to x, which we do have. So we have a horizontal shift left 4. Okay, next. We're looking for stretching or shrinking. That's multiplication by a positive. This one's a little tricky. This -2 is actually 2 transformations at the same time. -2 is the same thing as multiplying by 2 and then multiplying by -1. So this part of the number is a stretch or a shrink, and this part of the number, multiplication by -1, is a reflection. So this single integer, -2, represents 2 different transformations at the same time. The 2 part represents a stretch or shrink. The negative part represents a reflection. Okay, so let's do the 2 part. The 2 part is outside far from x, which makes this vertical. And the fact that it's multiplication by a positive means it's a stretch or shrink. Which is it? Well, 2 is bigger than 1. Verticals behave the way you would expect, so this is a stretch. Okay, next we deal with the minus here. All right, that minus is indicative of a reflection, and the minus is outside far from x, so that makes it a vertical reflection. And then finally, we look for vertical shifts, which would be adding or subtracting outside far from x. We don't have any, and so we are done with this part of the problem. Okay, we've now identified all of our transformations. Now we're going to figure out which coordinates change and how for each one. There's a pattern that I definitely want you to recognize. Horizontal transformations change only the x coordinates. Vertical transformations change only the y coordinates. All right, so here we go. Horizontal. That means that the x coordinates are going to change. And if we're moving to the right, they're getting bigger, so that's add 2. X coordinates add 2. All right, vertical affects the Y coordinates. And if we're going down, we're getting smaller, so that's subtraction. So Y coordinates subtract. Oh, I've got a wrong number here. This is a mistake from a long time ago. This should have been right 3 and add 3. Sorry about that. Okay, vertical shift down 2, that means the Y coordinates are going to subtract 2. Okay, next one, horizontal shrink. So with the horizontal, the first thing you want to recognize is that horizontal affects X coordinates. And with a horizontal stretch or shrink, the X coordinates are divided by 2. Okay, next, horizontal shift left 4. Well, it's horizontal, so that affects X coordinates. And if we're going to the left, that means we're getting smaller, so we're going to subtract 4. Okay, next, vertical stretch. Well, it's vertical, so that affects Y coordinates. So with vertical stretch or shrink, it's the Y's that are multiplied by something. So Y coordinates are multiplied by, in this case, 2. All right, and then lastly, vertical reflection. It's vertical, so that affects the Y coordinates. And with a reflection, they are multiplied by -1. Or if you prefer, you can write Y coordinates change sign. Either way is acceptable. All right, that finishes these 3 problems. In the next video, we will finish the other 3 problems.